listening to the Christ Our Cornerstone podcast, a ministry of Christ Our Cornerstone Church in O'Neill, Nebraska. I'm Pastor Logan Merrick, and it's our prayer that this message strengthens your faith and draws you closer to Christ. Let's dive in. Hello, friends. Pastor Logan Merrick here. And just before we get going with this sermon, just want to give you a heads up. The audio is not great, and I apologize. I forgot to bring my little microphone that I attached to my lapel to record the audio. So my son had to record it with my phone. So it doesn't sound great. It's not terrible, but it's not, quality that I would love to have. But so I just wanted to apologize for that. But still, I hope that you get something out of this message. And as I've said before, don't let this be, you should be involved in a local congregation. Don't let this be your church. If you are not physically a part of our congregation, for me to be able to shepherd you, you should have a shepherd over you and someone who is loving you, pointing you to Christ, helping you grow in discipleship. And we need the church. We need each other because life gets difficult. And so we are not meant to walk this alone. And so I would encourage you to not let this be your church, but it's only supplemental as you grow. With that said, I hope you enjoy this sermon as we continue our walk through the book of Jonah. This is Jonah chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program, back to Jonah. So, what did we talk about last week? What do we know about Jonah? Everybody goes back to their notes, and the people that weren't here look down, hoping that Pastor Logan won't notice them. Yes, he is a patriot. He's very much, he loves his country, right? He was a prophet to the king. He was the only prophet during that time. We talked about Hosea and Amos spoke against the crown, right? And different things that Jeroboam, he was like, those two prophets in particular were like, hey, Israel is in sin. But Jonah was like, hey, you're great. Things are great. All those things. And then Jonah, because of that, Jonah hated who? The Ninevites, right? And he had good reason for it, right? What do we know about the Ninevites?
Bad dudes.
Definitely bad dudes. What makes them bad? You guys remember? They were cannibals. Yeah. They weren't just slapping people with fish like they say in VeggieTales, right? Yeah, they would cut off legs and arms so that way as they other enemies, right? Yeah, they would high five them in mockery. What else? They would make family members parade decapitated heads of their loved ones, right? And they were brutal people, and they were also pagan, right? They worshiped false gods. And so Jonah feels this sense of self-righteousness, and he doesn't want to have to do what? What does God tell him to do? Go preach to him, right? Go preach repentance. And he's like, nah, right? And so we're going to, because we only got through the first 3.5 verses, I'm going to start at the top, and then we're going to go through 6. And I want you to just highlight or underline things that stick out to you. And I'll tell you the things that I think you should pay attention to. But I told you last week that I identified a lot with Jonah, especially with his, when we're talking about the will of God and him feeling like God owes me, right? I do all of these things. And as I was riding in the car with my wife last night, I said, you know what? I said, I've never in all my years, I've preached through this text many times. I've never noticed that the word get up, arise, okay, we're going to see it some more, is in the text. But that's the very word, that word kum, okay? In Hebrew, that word kum means to get up, stand up, arise, go, persevere. That is what is tattooed on my forearm. Some of you guys have asked before. Never noticed it before. And my wife's like, and she's like, so tell me about what you're going to be preaching on tomorrow. And I'm telling her, she's like, wow, in so many ways, you are like Jonah. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for the reminder. All right, here we go. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their evil has come up before me. So Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. Why do you think it says where he's going multiple times? What did we say where Tarshish was? When I showed you guys the map last week. It's the opposite direction. For them, it was like literally the end of the map. And so this is Jonah's way of saying, yeah, I was literally going the opposite direction. But the Lord threw a great wind onto the sea, and such a great storm arose, there's that word again, on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. And the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing? Sound asleep? Get up!" He's hearing, "Arise, go," right? "Call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish." All right. What do you see? What are things that you think that we should be looking at? What are the things that we should be taking note of? Let's start here. What is Jonah's attitude? Yeah, he doesn't want to go, right? What else? Huh? He's rebelling. Yep.
He took action and went the other way. He didn't just think about it, he went.
Yeah. I want you to hone in on, for just a moment, the fact that he's in a deep sleep and the others are doing what? Praying to their God, right? Are these sailors new? Are they new to sailing? No. They're terrified. They're scared out of their mind. So this isn't just a normal storm. They feel that this is a God-ordained storm. Now, granted, their God-ordained storm, they're thinking of all these different gods that they worship, right? But Jonah is fast asleep in the boat. I'll just go ahead and say it. There's a selfish attitude that's happening here, right? Jonah is not affected in the least. He doesn't care about what's going on. In his mind, he is going as far as he can from the Lord's presence. Now, we talked about last week, is this possible? No, right? Our verse of the week last week was showing and Jonah knew that song. Doesn't matter where I go, I can make my bed in Sheol and you are there. So is Jonah unaware that God isn't there? No. He totally knows he's there. He knows he's everywhere. But he's lying to himself. And so there's many times in our own rebellion, we will lie to ourselves about the truth of God. Just so you know. But here's something I want you to note. We can lie to ourselves too and think that we are at peace when we are in rebellion. Here's what I mean. We can be like, Nacho Libre, my life is good. Really good. And really our life is miserable. Jonah's in a deep sleep. And we can think, oh man, I sleep fine at night. and there's chaos going on. But just because you sleep fine at night, and there may be some things that you find peace in, but you know that you're in rebellion to God, just because you have that peace does not mean that you are not in sin. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you, Dave. At least Dave got it. What else do we see here? What else should we be picking up? Look at verse 1, and then look at verse 4. Here's something that Warren Wiersbe, when I was reading a book that he wrote on Jonah, that I did not pick up myself, and he pointed it out, and I thought it was really good. Verse 1 says, what came to Jonah? The word of the Lord. In verse 4, what comes to Jonah? A storm. Is the Lord speaking? Kind of, but not actually out of his mouth, right? He's speaking through his acts and his ability to control creation. And so one of the things that that Warren Wiersbe points out that I think is really, really good is he said, whenever we walk in rebellion, God stops speaking. He gets your attention, but he stops speaking. And we're going to see in just a second why, because I asked my wife, I said, you ever thought about the fact that when the captain comes down, he says, pray to your God, why Jonah doesn't pray to God? And she's like, I can't remember what exactly she said, but I said, Warren Wiersbe points out, again, Jonah knows the Psalms. He says, it's from the fact that whenever we are in rebellion, God does not hear. It says that he shuts us off in our prayers. And Jonah knows that. And so he's like, yeah, I'm in rebellion. So even if I did pray, it wouldn't matter. And so there are those things in here that I'm like, man, that's really, really good to point out that God speaks, then he stops speaking, but he doesn't stop speaking in the way that he's just like shut Jonah off. He's like, oh no, you're going to do what I've called you to do, but I'm done asking or telling. I'm going to just make you do it. Another thing that's important to point out too is that God, as he is moving and doing these things with the storm, these others are crying out to their gods and nothing's happening, right? This is God also flexing. He's flexing the false gods. And he's going, yeah, no, I am in creation. I am in control of creation. I spoke all of these things into existence. I'm the one in control. So that's important to also know. Anything else that you guys see that maybe should be considered?
God used the ungodly to speak to the rebellion.
Yes. Dude, you want to come up here and preach? That's really good. Yes. I was actually, this past Friday, I was at lunch with Dustin and Chap, who they had speak at their discipleship or family discipleship conference that they had. And Jamie, I got to meet Jamie, very nice guy. And we were just talking about how God, different ways God speaks and different things. And I said, what I find interesting is that God can still speak through donkeys. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, God speaks all the time through pagans. He speaks through rebellious, gross pastors, right? Like he still speaks, like he will speak. And even, as you just pointed out, he speaks to Jonah, right? He's not physically speaking, but he's using a pagan to get his attention to say the exact thing he already had said, right? Good word. Anything else? Nope. All right. Let's go ahead and start hitting it. You ready? So if you're taking notes, my first note is this. Sin brings its own storm. As we're looking at storms, we're going to look at sin and how sin brings its own storms. But I want to be clear, there's many times that we can think that, we've done something, and sometimes it's not our disobedience, sometimes it's just the enemy. We see that with Job, right? Job didn't do anything wrong. But there's times that we can blame the devil or blame the enemy for our storms, but we need to look internally and go, examine ourselves, as Paul would say, and go, oh, I did that, right? So not every storm is from the devil. Some are from our own disobedience. I want to give you guys a quick story. When Tracy and I were newly married, and I told you guys we were super, super, super broke. We found out that we were pregnant with Noah, and I was working 5 different jobs. And one of the jobs is I worked part-time for Frito-Lay, the chip company, stocking chips. And they offered me a job full-time, but I had to move 2.5 hours away from where we're from. And they were going to offer me, I would have insurance then because we didn't have insurance, just all these different things. And I would actually get paid a regular salary as opposed to just this small hourly wage. And so, but to move 2.5 hours south meant it's going to cost a lot more money to live. And so where that area was is called Cape Coral, which is Fort Myers, if you know. So it's essentially like, think of the beach south. And so I go home and I'm like, yes, I didn't think about it. I told them, yes, I would do it. And my parents were like, yeah, this is the only logical thing. You've got a kid on the way. You need to be thinking this way. So you need to do this. So I go home and I tell Tracy, and Tracy's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, it just makes sense. And she's like, well, okay. And I will never forget, we got our house all packed up, and I laid in bed the night before we moved, and I will never forget the Lord waking me up, and very clearly he was like, you are not to go. You need to trust me. And remember what I told you guys last week, sometimes God will speak and he will tell you to do things that it feels not logical, right? It doesn't feel like common sense. Because anybody else in this room, you would tell your kid, or if it was you, yes, you got a kid on the way, you don't have insurance, you're barely scraping by, this is a good salary, go, right? Well, I'm like, God, there's no way that this is you speaking to me. We're going. So we load everybody up. We drive 2.5 hours there. Tracy is really big pregnant. And we show up to our rental house, and the doors are locked. There's no one there to give us a key. The rental company has already closed for the day. And I'm like, wonderful. And it was a Friday, by the way. So I'm like, what do we do now? And so my father-in-law says, well, I'll pay for you guys to get a hotel. So we go in, we stay in this hotel. I'm trying to get on the phone with these people. I'm like, we're supposed to have keys, we're supposed to have all these things. And they were like, well, we never got a deposit check from you. I'm like, yes, you did. There's just all this big thing. Well, then finally I ended up just literally, I broke into the house from the back door. And I'm like, we're just doing this. And I get our animals all in there and everything. And we're all in this house. And the people show up on a Sunday because I was not expecting them. They're like, what are you guys doing here? How did you even get in here? You're trespassing. And I'm like, well, I technically signed a lease. Yeah, but you didn't pay. There's this whole thing. Anyway, we finally get that worked out. I try to go to work for the next few months. I don't have enough money. Literally one time, our vehicle ran out of gas. We had $0. We were more broke than we were back home. I was miserable. My wife, thank God there was a grace on her, because it was she was like, yeah, it was just, we didn't have cable. We didn't have anything. So it was just her and our 2 dogs. And she's like, I spent so much time with Jesus. But it was It was a miserable time. And the entire time, I'm driving in the middle of the night, because that's what you do for Frito-Lay. You wake up at like 2 a.m. I'm driving to all these like gas stations and Walmarts, and I'm like, I hate my life. And I can feel the Lord going, I told you not to go. And I'm like, and so it did not matter that I had a regular salary that was better and all these things. We were more broke than we were before. The only good thing was we now had insurance, and so when Frito-Lay brought us back home, we ended up having Noah, and those things ended up working out. But I learned then that when the Lord tells you, don't do something, or do something and you don't do it, you end up doing it in the end. That make sense? And so, Jonah didn't stumble into a storm. He sailed straight into it. When we run from God, we row against his will. And here's the other thing I want you to know. Don't curse the waves you've created. The entire time I was in Cape Coral, I was absolutely cursing everything. Like I was like, I hate the rental company. I hate our vehicles. I hate the job that I have. Like, I hate my boss. Like, I hate all these things. And the Lord was just like, I don't know why you're hating all these things. Like, you did this to yourself. But how many of you have done that? How many of you have rebelled, looked around, and then go, oh, like the great theologian Taylor Swift, I'm the problem, it's me. You guys know that song? No? All right. I'm just joking. She's not a theologian. She's a Satanist. Anyway. So what are some other ways that we see this play out? Let's consider the life of King David, who, despite being a man after God's own heart, fell into sin by committing adultery with Bathsheba. This act of disobedience spiraled into deception and ultimately murder. The storm of consequences that followed was immense, affecting his entire family. Hear David's story. We learn how sin can provoke chaos in our lives. Do you see it? Do you see how sin affects? In just one moment of David looking down too longingly at another woman, he commits adultery, and so he commits an act against his wife and his children and the kingdom and, of course, God. And then he ultimately murders, right? From one moment of sin. Willful disobedience can lead to bodily hurt, relational hurt, and spiritual hurt. So if we think about all the lives that were affected by David and his decision, let's go to point number 2. I'm trying something different here. I didn't write out my sermon completely. I tried to do it like a little guideline. I don't know how I like it. Point number 2. Running from God always costs you something. So if we look back, it says that Jonah paid a fare to go, right? He was like, 1 ticket to the farthest place on earth, please. And he's like, oh, really? That's how much? I got exactly that amount of money. So sin always has a fare, and you'll always pay more than you've planned. David paid a great price for what he did. Jonah as well. Jonah paid to get on a ship, as we see in verse 3. And sin looks like freedom, but it always takes more than it gives. Andy Griffith. You guys know Andy Griffith? I'm like addicted right now to watching the old episodes on Prime. And there was this episode where Andy gets this person, and ultimately, I don't need to give you the whole episode, but there's always this great like moral story with value to the episodes, right? But he says, if you think you're just going to play around with breaking the law, you'll end up essentially biting off more than you can chew. I totally jacked up what he said because it was really good and angry with life. But sin will keep you longer than you ever wanted to stay, is essentially what he was saying, in prison. You think you're just doing a small thing and you end up way farther down the road than you ever did. Let me put it to you like this. Have you ever known somebody to try a drug and they're just going to try it recreationally? And then you see them years down the road and their life is wrecked? Do you know what I'm talking about? When I talk about bodily hurt, what sin can do, I have seen pictures of women who are very attractive and they get addicted to meth, and then they look 30 years older than they actually are. They've lost all their teeth, right? They have gaunt face. Sin will take you a lot farther than you ever wanted to go. It always costs you something. Rebellion always costs you something. Disobedience doesn't just affect you, it endangers everyone in your boat. So if I go back to the drug addict, I've seen drug addicts, because we were foster parents, who could not get their lives together for the sake of their children, so their children just stay stuck in the system forever and their lives completely ruined too. Here's a story that I found again about running from God always costs you something. In the midst of the French Revolution, many believers faced persecution for their faith. One such individual, a pastor, chose to hide rather than face the violence against Christians. However, as the revolution intensified, he learned that his silence cost him his congregation and his influence. Ultimately, he realized that standing firm in his faith, no matter the cost, was the only path to true obedience and impact for God's kingdom. A lesson still relevant for today. So essentially, the point of that being this: he needed to speak up. His sin was rebellion of not speaking up and caring for his congregation, and ultimately he lost it and lost his influence. How many key figures in Scripture experience the price of sin? Oh yeah. All of them? Yeah. Let's just name a few.
Abraham.
Huh? Abraham. I have Abraham. Who else? Come on.
Moses.
What'd you say? Moses. Come on. You guys didn't know there was going to be a test today, did you? I'm sorry. Adam and Eve. Yes, I started with Adam and Eve. So I got Adam and Eve, Moses, we got Abraham. There's one really obvious one that you guys are missing.
Judas.
Judas is a great one. Saul. Saul's a good one. Samson. Who said that? Yes! I think Samson was a great example of what we're talking about. What did Samson do? Who was Samson?
He's prideful.
He was prideful? Okay, let's start at the beginning. For anybody that's in the room that doesn't know the story of Samson, let's start at the beginning. Samson an angel came to a woman who could not have children. Ultimately, this angel says, you're going to have a child, but you got to make sure that he follows this vow. That vow being he cannot drink alcohol, right? He cannot cut his hair or his beard. There are other pieces to that. Don't touch dead things, a lot of that kind of stuff, right? And so he cannot do those things, right? He's ultimately born, but he has this super strength. He becomes a leader. Something, by the way, total side note, that I think is important, because like when I was a kid, there was these video series that these kids would go back in time and they would go through Bible stories. And I will never forget the one on Samson. And Samson was just absolutely stacked ripped. Like I'm talking front page of whatever workout magazine, because I know so many of them. I don't know what they're titled, but just absolutely just decked out, right? Just stacked. And I'm like, wow. I mean, did he really? And I remember as a kid thinking, did Samson really need the power of the Holy Spirit if he was that absolutely stacked? And then it wasn't until seminary that one of my professors was like, hey, more than likely Samson was very skinny. And I was like, take one for the skinny guys. You know what I mean? That's how we knew it was the power of the Holy Spirit. He could do all these things. Anyway, He defeats 1,000 Philistines and all these things, and he keeps falling in love with women who are not Israelites. But the first one that he falls in love with, actually God says to do. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he ultimately falls in love with a prostitute. The prostitute has been paid off by the enemy. And she says, what does it take to ultimately, what's the secret to your strength? And what does he say? He says, my hair, my beautiful locks, right? Just run your fingers through my hair, my sweet beard. And so when he falls asleep, which by the way, man, you got to be in a deep sleep if you don't feel a lady cutting your hair, brother. And so she cuts his hair, ultimately becomes enslaved, right? They gouge his eyes out. What's the price that he paid? His strength, right? His ability to lead. His ability to absolutely break the back of the enemy, right? The Spirit no longer rested upon him. And then as his hair began to grow back, what does he say? Just give me one more chance, right? And he dies, right? But the Philistines, 3,000 Philistines died that day. That's an incredible picture of running from God always costs you something. Of course, David, as we've already pointed out. I think of ministries and churches that have been ruined because of the sin of pastors, elders, and deacons. We've seen it all over the news for the last however many years. Famous pastors, authors who have all this influence, and they think in their own haughtiness and pridefulness that they'll never be caught, but their secret sins always get found out. And is it just them that get hurt? No. Ministries are ruined. Churches are hurt. A lot of people in the church are hurt. Leadership is hurt. And of course, wives, spouses are hurt. Families split because of affairs committed, lies told, and bitterness harbored, or addictions chosen. Sin will always seem like a little thing, but it will always take you farther than you ever wanted to go. Point number 3. God sends storms to save, not to destroy. This is important, okay? We can look at the storm that Jonah is going through and think that God is only meaning this in a way that could destroy him. But is that God's intention? We know the end of the story. Is that God's intention? No, absolutely not. What is God trying to do? Correction. So, is the correction just for Jonah? No. Who's it for? Nineveh. Yes, it's for Jonah, but ultimately it's for God's heart. As we talked about, what is Jonah about? It's not about Jonah. It's about God and God's heart. So God's heart is always to save. The only one he seeks to destroy is who? The one who seeks to destroy you, right? And so when God sends a storm or a storm comes your way through your own sin, do not see it as it's not just about punishment. And that's what I have here. The storm was punishment, but it was also pursuit. It's God pursuing Jonah saying, stop. I have your best interest in mind. Stop being scared. Stop being prideful. Stop being self-righteous. And just go. But Jonah takes the long way around because, by the way, to get from Joppa, and where he's from in Gath, to go to Joppa is 50 miles. Remember, he's walking. So that's going to take him some time. Then he's going to get on a boat. That's going to take him time. And then he's got to float, go back, right? And then how far did I say Tarshish or Nineveh was from Gath? 500 miles. So think about all the time that Jonah has lost. And the entire time, God is going, man, if you would just listen, you took the hard way around. Brothers and sisters, I have done that so many times. I have taken the long way around. You guys have heard me say it 1,000 times. As a matter of fact, Micah
as we were pulling in, he goes, Dad, can you believe it's almost been a year since you preached here the first time that you and I came? And I go, no, yeah, it has. It almost has been a year. It's been December. And he goes, and to think, God finally got you here. I'm telling you, man, me and Jonah got a lot in common. But God kept pursuing me. I took the long way around, but I finally got here. God wasn't trying to sink Jonah. He was trying to save him and save Nineveh. Sometimes God's mercy feels like chaos before it feels like the calm. And God will rock the boat to rescue your soul. Consider a gardener who prunes trees, not to destroy them, but to foster new growth. In a similar sense, God's storms in our lives serve as a necessary pruning, cutting away of distractions and sinful habits so that we can blossom in ways previously thought impossible. His chaos can lead to profound fondness for the beauty of his design. During World War II, many cities experienced bombing raids that, while destructive, led to eventual what? Liberation, right? The bombings of cities in World War II brought destruction, but ultimately brought liberation. Liberation of the occupants. God's storms may feel like an assault on our lives, but they often serve a greater purpose. Just as those cities rebuilt stronger after the chaos, we too can emerge from God's storms more resilient and closer to Him. I want to give you an example of this in the life of my cousin. My cousin, his name is Garrett, and Garrett is in my entire life. Garrett, I looked up to him. He was a ladies' man, and as his cousin, 4 years younger, he was a great athlete. But I was enamored by the girls that liked him. And I was like, dang, man, how do I get to be so smooth like Garrett? And Garrett would always be like, you never will, man. I'm just too good. But Garrett was also heavily influenced by others. And he, early in high school, got in with the wrong crowd and became a drug addict. He was, by the time he was a sophomore, we had this store that's kind of like Dillard's, but it's a local store in Florida called Birdine's. And he stole a bunch of Tommy Hilfiger stuff, very expensive clothing, and he was ultimately banned from Birdine's for life. Well, Birdine's, ultimately Garrett got the last laugh because Birdine's went out of business about 5 years ago. So, but anyway, he gets really caught up. He's been to jail many times, goes to prison many times. His life is an absolute wreck. And one day, I went and visited him with my mother while he was in prison, and I just shared the gospel with him, felt led to do that. He knew the gospel. He grew up in church just like I did. But ultimately, he surrendered that day. Like he finally got to a place where God had rattled his cage enough where he could stop running. And sometimes we have to get to that place where God is more than willing to let us get to a place where we just stop running. We tire ourselves out. And Garrett did. And so Garrett begins to read the Bible while he's in prison, and he comes up for parole, and ultimately they let him move to Teen Challenge. If you guys know what Teen Challenge is, it is I don't know that they have them like this anymore, but back then in North Florida, they had them where they were like a boot camp. And so he goes to that, gets clean, and now he has a family. He's got kids. He has a very successful construction business in Florida. He loves the Lord, but it took him continually making terrible decisions after terrible decisions, and everybody going, Garrett, this isn't the life God has for you. And he just continued to make dumb decisions after dumb decision. But finally, he gets to a place where he stops running because he's in prison, and he can finally hear the love that God has for him and says, it's time to stop running. Last Last point. There's always mercy in the storm. God uses storms to change us. We talked about Abraham, right? Abraham experienced years of wandering to prepare him to become the father of a nation. Joseph experienced slavery and prison to break him of his own arrogance to prepare him to save a nation. Storms are a kind of mercy for us and for others. The saving of Nineveh. So you need to hear that the storm, it's not just about the storm. It's not just about the chaos. You should see the mercy within the chaos. Yes, you have chosen this. And yes, you are reaping your own harvest because of the sin you've committed. And God is allowing these storms to happen. But ultimately, there is mercy in that. The story of Job is one of the most profound examples of mercy in storms. Job faced unimaginable loss and suffering, yet through it all, he gained a deeper understanding of God's nature. Now again, not all storms are because of our own disobedience, but I'm still speaking like from a big 30,000 foot view of storms. His trials seen through human eyes were storms, yet they were also God's merciful hand guiding Job to a greater relationship with him in our storms. We can find a similar mercy inviting us to trust him more. So I want to ask you, if there is a storm that either you have created or a storm you're just walking through that is not of your own creation, but it's a storm nonetheless, it feels chaotic, it feels like things are out of control, I would ask you to do one of two things. If it is from your own creation, that you would stop, that you would repent. That you would see Jesus standing there. I want you to think of it like this. I heard a pastor years ago say, many times, we're wondering where God is in everything in the midst of a storm, and he's like, if you would just stop and turn around, you'd see that he's standing right there. He's been pursuing you the entire time. Much the way a father does to a child who's running out into the street. And so I would ask you to just stop and turn around and see that maybe the storm that has been created is the mercy of God trying to get your attention because you're running out into traffic. If it's not from your own creation, but it's just because of we live in a fallen world and therefore it just happens. Storms happen. I would ask you to look for the mercy of God in that. Just like Job, you should seek and ask the Lord, where are you? The psalmist said over and over, how long? You can ask that. Charles Spurgeon said this, and I'm closing. The Lord's mercy is a sea which cannot be filled. Though mountains of sin be cast into its midst, it is like Noah's flood, which covers all and drowns even the mountaintops of heaven-defying sins. I'm going to say that one more time because you have to get what Charles Spurgeon is saying. The Lord's mercy is a sea which cannot be filled. Though mountains of sin be cast into its midst, it is like Noah's flood, which covers all and drowns even the mountaintops of heaven-defying sins. That's the mercy of God. You can't out-sin it. I'm not saying to go try. But the mercy of God fills even that. And so why do I share that? Because if you're in this room this morning and you're running from God, He's been tracking you down like the hound of heaven that He is. And He has brought you to this place for this moment right now. This is his mercy. This is his call. This is the moment that he's saying it's time to stop running. If you're here in the midst of a storm that has been difficult, but it's not sin caused, I would say again, look for the mercy of Christ. Look up. Get your eyes off of yourself and off the moment, and just look up to Jesus. The other thing I would like to say in closing is this. If you have, like Jonah, are rebelling against God, quit living a selfish life and see that you are affecting others around you. And those who you have affected in your own sin, you should repent to. Let's pray.